Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon.
Hi, good morning.
Hello, everyone. Brian,
Hello.
nice to see you.
Hello.
Hello.
Good day.
Good day. Let's just give everyone a couple more minutes and then we'll join.
Perfect. Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Let's just give everyone a couple more minutes and then
Oh, absolutely. I'm early.
Yeah.
I have learned not to try being merely on time. It doesn't work that way.
we can always strive for the perfection, correct?
Yeah. Well, with the software update of the hour environment these days, I've discovered there's any number of ways for a camera to disagree with a conferencing platform, to disagree with a browser about who's actually in charge. Good morning, Brian.
Good morning, Peter. You know, one thing that we can do, I'll just propose if you're open for a last minute update, is that my presentation following this starts a little bit later, so I can stay for the whole thing. And maybe what we could do is I could present, and then Peter can present, and we could do a joint Q&A so that I don't.
Which I think is great. I always prefer to do combined Q&As because that way people can say, wait a minute, you said this, you said this. Could you please fight this out? Yeah, that's terrific. That'll be great. We have, I think, 90 minutes on the calendar. Yes. Okay.
Yes, that is correct.
And the basic idea is that Brian's going to take a half hour, I'll take a half hour, and
Yep.
then the last half hour will be Q&A. Is that?
Yeah, we can switch to that format, definitely.
Yeah, I think that'll be terrific because then they can kind of get, you know, the whole picture, and we won't have any situations where they say, well, Brian, what about this? And you'll say, well, Peter's going to talk about that. So yeah, that'll be great.
Awesome. All right. How about we do get started? So welcome everyone to this wonderful session in which we're going to talk about some of the best practices that we see in Silicon Valley and beyond about leading the innovation and thinking about what it actually means to do the digital transformation and how we can lead that. So we have two uh, very decorated, let's say, speakers that we have today, both from our partner Salesforce. So we're going to start with Brian Zales, who's a global innovation evangelist at Salesforce. He's also an 8x bestselling author, international keynote speaker, and digital anthropologist. Forbes has called him one of the more creative and brilliant business minds of our time. And SDNet has said that Brian is one of the 21st century business world's leading thinkers. For over 20 years, Brian has studied digital Darwinism to understand the impact of disruption on businesses, market, and society. In his work, he humanizes technologies and trends to help leaders gain new perspective and insights and inspire new ideas to thrive in the future. Our second speaker is Peter Coffey, who is VP of Strategic Research at Salesforce. Peter has been with the company for 14 years since joining as the first head of platform research in 2007. He currently works with Salesforce customers, partners, and account teams to accelerate digital transformation and respond to new challenges of information, scale, and governance. He has previously worked as a software developer and as technology and business consultant, writer, educator, and entrepreneur in sectors ranging from Arctic resources development to aerospace and finance. He's co-founder and president of the Foundation of Intelligent Life on Earth, a nonprofit corporation addressing issues on climate change and opportunities for exploration both on and off planet. So without further delay, Brian, you're first in line, so please go ahead.
I love that, Peter, on and off planet. Thank you for the introduction. I will share this, that a lot of the work that I've done in digital transformation spans, well, a really long time, let's just say, and a couple of different roles in that. Most of what I learned about digital transformation has come from two parts: helping to lead digital transformation, and in some cases from beginning to an end, at least one significant milestone. And another is through the research of the digital transformation of other organizations. And now there's the whole pandemic and post-pandemic world that's starting to take shape. And today, I'm spending a lot of time with our customers, helping them to take bites of digital transformation beyond just the reaction to this digital first work from anywhere world. So the presentation that I've put together for you is going to span my research. I think I've written about 6 to 8 reports on the subject, and I can share them through our friends at the Silicon Valley Innovation Center for you if you'd care to read them later. And then also some of the best practices that we have. Then following the presentation, Peter will share his work and ideas with you, and then we'll host a joint Q&A. So with that said, I'll jam over to PowerPoint, and let's just hope that this works. All right. Hopefully you can see this. So the agenda that Silicon Valley Innovation Center shared with us is to discuss the role of leadership of digital transformation. I think we're going to have to do our best here, because certainly each organization is unique in the culture that it has and the infrastructure that it operates around. Even though there are common models, every organization is unique. The principles of digital transformation. And then we'll do our best to share stories, personal experiences, case studies with you. As you heard earlier, the term digital Darwinism, this is something that I have linked to in my work going back to the 90s as a means of just humanizing what's really happening. Digital isn't just about embracing new and modern technologies, implementing them as they gain traction. It's really about understanding how digital changes everything, how digital changes the nature of how we want to work, how we want to shop, how we align with companies, and then how technology infrastructures and platforms and systems and front offices and back offices and data and everything together can work seamlessly as if it was second nature. And this is where things get interesting. is that it's not about how much you keep up with it. It's about how well you're performing in the market and how well the market reacts to your transformation. We all know that over the last 20 years, digital Darwinism has demonstrated that if you are not keeping up with the, let's say, trends, tastes, times, and that you continue to force a business model or business as usual on a market as it's evolving, then the market will let you know that that's just not going to work. So essentially, this is not just about digital transformation. Essentially, what we're doing is we're using digital as a means to be better, to do better, to make a greater impact on markets and society. It's a purpose, it's intention, it's an executed vision. And it's basically operating around the mindset that how we did things doesn't necessarily predicate how we need to do things. And that's, this is, basically digital transformation and digital Darwinism are all based on Joseph Schumpeter's position on what he called creative destruction back in the 1920s, 1930s. And that was essentially the idea, completely summarizing it, that what was old has to make way for what's new, and which will eventually make way for what's new again. It's just constant evolution. So essentially, though, if we're not using digital transformation as a mechanism to be better, do better, et cetera, then I call it the Kodak moment. And Kodak, as we all know, was and is trying to be again a treasured brand. But essentially, in its case, it wasn't just about its ability to not go digital. It was its insistence on prioritizing legacy business models that were profitable in the name and at the cost of other opportunities. Because Kodak eventually did go digital. It just did so, let's just say, a little bit later than it probably should have, and without the full understanding of how the culture of society had changed. So, for example, if you think about what really impacted Kodak's business beyond all of the stories we've heard, is that Kodak was a nostalgia business. Right? It really traded on memories. We all had shoeboxes full of pictures. We all had family albums. Our mother or someone who was always the steward of those memories when families got together or friends came over. And if you think about what digital did in terms of transitioning how we think about pictures as consumers, it changed from memories to experiences, in the fact that, for example, you probably have thousands of pictures on your phone right now that you're never, ever going to see again. There's no steward of collecting those memories per se. And they're usually not coming out in the form of projectors when people come over. So then the idea of digital transformation for Kodak was also the transformation of digital's impact on society and consumerism and cultures and norms and values and behaviors. And I share that with you because that was one of the biggest insights that I had in 10, 12, 14 years of research that showed that digital transformations often fail when there wasn't a sense of purpose around them that was going to give them meaning on all sides of the equation. This is why, as you heard in my bio earlier, that I became, or still aspire to become, a digital anthropologist, because the relationship between employees and customers and their relationship with technology and how we think about our digital transformation roadmaps and the reason why those roadmaps are what they are to connect the dots. So I'll give you an example. Beyond Kodak, this is just a very short sampling of some of the most transformative digital milestones that have happened in the last 20 and 30 years. Every single one of these logos or icons or favicons has changed the course of consumerism. Whether it's Netscape and Amazon in the 90s, to iTunes, Facebook, the iPhone itself, arguably the biggest impact on all of this. You have the App Store, you have Uber, Spotify, TikTok, Fortnite. All of these things changes how we as consumers and employees navigate life, communicate, connect, shop, engage. So these things become the nature of how we're going to work, the nature of how a business is going to connect employees and information, connect partners and supply chains, connect directly with customers in all facets of engagement. It isn't just about trying to keep up with these companies, it's trying to understand how they've changed the course of work, of shopping, of entertainment, what those norms, values, and aspirations become. And we're not done. We still have a lot to do. And why that's important is because even before the pandemic, we were already going through the fourth industrial revolution, which is only going to continue. And every single one of these current trends, and there'll be more, are going to create the next logo, the next favicon that you'll see on that slide that's going to transform, again, our premise and needs for digital transformation. In fact, it just becomes infinite. I call it infinite digital transformation because I haven't come up with a better name for it yet. But essentially, it's this idea that our digital transformation is ongoing and it's consistent, and we have to organize accordingly. So we need to understand what's driving digital transformation. What does digital transformation look like on the other side? What is transformation? What does it look like? What does it feel like? Where are we? And then how do we break it into milestones? And then essentially transforming those milestones into achievable stages. So there's a couple of ways to think about this. I like to break it down into the best practices of digital transformation that I've seen. There's digitization or digitalization. And then there's this idea of total transformation. And each carry their own set of objectives. For example, on the digitization side, we can think about that like iteration, which is using new technologies to do what we did yesterday better tomorrow, or today, I should say. Faster, better, at scale, automation, for example, RPA as another example. Digital transformation, on the other hand, is just that. It's a state of change. What does change look like? And when we ask ourselves, what does change look like in a world that's changing, then that can lead to the opportunity for innovation. How do we use technology to do things better that create new value? So it's a net new. And both of these, when working in partnership, whether that's infrastructure, whether that's customer facing, for example, like e-commerce, it gives us an opportunity to then always improve. In one of the more, I'll say, I hope insightful reports was that I was able to take all of the companies I had researched at the time, including my experiences, and I broke out digital transformation into 6 stages. And this was really my way of helping organizations understand that there's a path that companies make, not always linearly. Sometimes they go backwards in order to go forwards again. But to understand that the transformation part of this was really what was important, because in each one of the steps, digitization was the most common. We were using digital as a means of updating and upgrading and modernizing. And ultimately, on the latter stages, we were using digital to also introduce new innovative business models, new ways of working, new ways of creating value for employees and customers, et cetera. And I can have this report shared with you, but it really broke down the details of what each stage means. And it was also important as a barometer to understand where you were and where you were trying to go, with the ultimate with Converged being cross-functional digital transformation groups with new leadership models supporting it. And then finally, innovative and adaptive, which was essentially the foundation for infinite digital transformation, which was to say, we're going to be intentionally innovative, we're going to be intentionally iterative, and we're also going to improve and innovate over time. One of the most common questions I get is, where do I start? And I don't really have an easy answer for you, other than to quote Steve Jobs, which is something I think is mandatory in every presentation coming out of Silicon Valley, is that you have to start with the customer experience and work backward toward the technology. And this is coming from one of the most innovative companies in the world, is understanding what is it that you're trying to bring to life? What is it that you're trying to deliver, that purpose, that intention, and then using technology as an enabler for that. So when we talk about innovation, it's everything: products, services, space, experience, work, but also mindset, and that we're future proofing with purpose. Now, to set the stage for digital transformation in today's context, is that we have to understand that there is a new milestone happening today, which is what I call the novel economy. It's my formal attempt at naming the next normal, this new normal and the next normal. And the reason why is because personally, when I think about the new normal and then I talk about it as the next normal, I get caught in yesterday's normal. So meaning that the things that we know and that the things that our experiences have taught us, our successes and our failures, tend to carry forward. But when we have such a global opportunity, a global state of transformation like we do today, then there is no playbook. That playbook has to be developed, which means that digital transformation can take on an entirely new meaning. And that's what I hope we get to share with you today and get to discuss today, is what does that look like? So the novel economy, as I at least tried to structure it, was broken out into three phases. There's we got to react in terms of digital transformation. So working from home, hybrid models, e-commerce, all of the things in order to be able to operationalize this new world for business continuity. Phase two, however, was, okay, now that we know that we can do those things, how can we do those things at scale? What else needs to happen? This is, for example, where RPA and chatbots are really coming into play. But also in phase two, I think that this is an opportunity to start asking different questions, to say, if everybody's disrupted, then everybody's going to react. And if we look historically at every great disruption, that it's always been a time for great invention. So what if we start asking different questions about our digital transformation, and how can we change the trajectory for phase three, which is a post-pandemic economy, and how we compete differently in that world. So for both iteration and innovation. So coming back to how society has changed in every major technology event that's happened over the last 30 years, this is another event, historical proportions, that isn't necessarily just about everybody becoming digital first. It's also everything associated with what's happening in the world today all at once. So we have, of course, the pandemic, but we also have incredible world politics that are divisive, but also awakening. We have climate change. We have civil unrest in places around the world. So all of these things really start to add up in here and in here. So that means that our consumer, our customer, and then our employee, we're all changing at a human level. And that means that decisions are going to be made differently. Demands are going to be different. Expectations are going to be different. And we could have a whole different presentation or discussion about the consumer's transformation right now. But because we have a limited amount of time, let's just go right to what our research is saying that they want now, which is your digital transformation has to be accelerated. So how do they define digital transformation? Well, to them, they want new ways to get existing products and services rather than just traditional experiences. Give me or use digital as a new mechanism to give me what I need or what I want. They want you to use digital to expand customer engagement methods, but don't just think about it as a chatbot. think about it, for example, as a chatbot powered by conversational AI so that it seems more human and conversational rather than transactional. They want new types of products and services. So this is that innovation standpoint. So create net new value. They also have a series of expectations. They want you to understand their unique needs and expectations. They want you to demonstrate empathy. So this is that opportunity for more personalized engagement. And they want consistent integrated interactions across departments. And if you combine this with personal engagement, this means that really what we're setting the stage for is becoming a customer 360 company, having a single source of truth that is consistent across every interaction, where all departments and technologies are operating on a platform, essentially an operating system for this post-pandemic economy. That's what digital transformation is really starting to get to. I had some research just published with Harvard Business Review. We haven't announced yet. And Peter, I'm going to ask you for a favor soon to help this research get out in the wild. That all organizations studied globally have said that improving customer experience is the #1 thing that they're setting out to do. But in order to do, though, that they recognize that they need a single 360 view of customer data and the organizational structure to make use of those insights. Yet, knowing that only 15% of companies around the world say that they have that. And I even think that that's high. So there's an opportunity here, I see, for companies to really start to think about digital transformation with a new or through a new lens, essentially going after that 360 operational model. And if you look at what the challenge that they've said, or the challenges that they said they have in order to achieve this new model, it's all of the usual stuff: silos, data silos, culture resistant to change. It's interesting, when I studied digital transformation and also I studied corporate innovation, often the #1 challenge was cultural resistance to change. But here you see outdated legacy systems, lack of investment, which basically means that all of these things are viewed by the C-suite and shareholders and boards as cost centers, not necessarily as investments, the ways, for example, a startup might see this opportunity. And lack of ownership. So if we go back to the agenda, new leadership roles for digital transformation, accountability is a big one. In fact, I worked with the Nespresso executive team. The entire C-suite flew out from headquarters, and we met in San Francisco, and we put together those new models. We assigned accountabilities and responsibilities for everyone to go back and lead that digital transformation at Nespresso, and then also worked with the Silicon Valley Innovation Center at Nestle to help sort of enact those as best practices or a center of excellence. But of course, things change, and they always do. According to our state of automation report that published recently, essentially what we're seeing is that innovators are creating a new playbook. And this really sets the stage for breaking down digital transformation into a set of necessities. Where can we fix problems? And then also, where can we create that new value? So workflow and processes, of course, adapting policies to be more flexible, understanding technology needs, understanding new technologies, and then also exploring opportunities for customer engagement methodologies. If we look at service organizations specifically, chatbots are the new workforce, complementing human representatives and agents to deliver better experiences. We can see, though, that between high-performing transformation organizations and underperforming organizations, it's pretty quite high in terms of that adoption, the delta. That AI now is really starting to be embraced to help agents, in this case, be more effective. But if we thought about the application of AI in each different type of role throughout the organization, we could see that the same things are going to be helpful, that making humans better, more helpful, empowered, helping to automate the mundane routine tasks away so that they can be more creative and engaging, and to say that they work in partnership with our human workforce. So setting the stage for skilling and reskilling, not replacement. In fact, the high-performing organizations have a fully defined AI strategy. And this is really interesting because shortly before the pandemic hit us, I had studied the awareness of AI possibilities amongst the C-suite. And I can't remember the exact stat, but it was in the 80%, 83%, I think it was, had said that they didn't fully understand the potential of AI at the time. And when we talk about, hey, this pandemic has accelerated digital transformation by 10 years, that's exactly what happened. Essentially, we're making decisions today as if it was 2030. Those roadmaps have fully accelerated. And this is why we have to accelerate what we don't have to transform the whole organization overnight, but we do have to prioritize where it's going to have its biggest impact. And also understand that digital transformation is as much about customer experience as it is with employee experience, because they're connected. EX drives CX. That's in our state of trends and workflow automation report. Executives believe that these not only go hand in hand, but EX and CX will drive revenue and growth, which is what we need for that stage 3 or phase 3 of the novel economy to compete differently. The best in class organization models that I had found, this is from a report that I had published with Capgemini, essentially showed that we were striving for a number of things: agility and flexibility, customer centricity, I would add employee centricity, innovation, data-driven decision-making, so customer 360, cross-functional collaboration, an open culture, which means that we can't be fixed and rigid and siloed, and this a digital-first mindset. Again, digital-first mindset isn't about digitization as much as it is about understanding how is digital changing how we behave, how we think, how we make decisions, how we want to operate. And then it's operationalizing around that. So this is a humorous version of a RACI model, but essentially not unlike what I had done with Nespresso executives, which was to understand, here are the things we need to do, who's going to own it, and who's going to do the work, and how are we going to create metrics around progress, and how are we going to define what success looks like, and how are we going to get executive sponsorships at a very human level, speaking the language of the C-suite, how all of this translates into not only transformation, but business improvement. And I also want to share that there was no circumstance, and remember the 6 stages of digital transformation, with the 6th being innovative, no successful digital transformation without an innovation strategy. So there was a team, or always was and will be a team dedicated to innovation. In fact, we've seen Walmart as one example, really starting to take these innovation efforts and then actually bring a lot of the once cultivated and nurtured executives, talent back into headquarters so that they can acclimate but also assimilate, like the Borg in Star Trek, to help drive that change at a culture level. So we don't have to jump into this, but I just wanted to share the different models that corporations were using to accelerate that innovation as means of essentially becoming like the startups that we either acquired or partnered with or feared. For example, one of our customers, Brinker, thought about during the pandemic, well, what can we do with all of our unused kitchens at Chili's and Maggiano's? And they had an epiphany, which was to create a digital first and digital only brand in partnership with DoorDash that you wouldn't even know it was a Chili's or Maggiano's kitchen, where they created It's Just Wings, a very clever and modern brand that was only digital. And I think its first 6 months generated 150 million of net new revenue. But anything is possible when you think like a startup. And this is, I think, the true magic gem from Silicon Valley, is just essentially challenging your own conventions and making investments as if you were not only a startup, but as if you wanted the returns like a startup, which was 10x, 100x on these investments. So not just thinking about our investments in transformation as a cost center, but thinking of our investments as true innovation. I think everybody's favorite story, it's personally mine. I had a chance to work with the chief digital officer of Domino's. And again, working with one of your colleagues in Noosa, who was a former Domino's executive who helped lead their digital transformation and innovation strategies. It works from an ROI perspective because that's what it's meant to do when it has purpose. Again, it's not just about digital transformation. It's about becoming a more relevant and meaningful company and then operating like that company to be more effective in terms of customer engagement, employee engagement. In fact, if I remember correctly, more than half of the employees at Domino's HQ were software engineers. And so I'll as we start to wind down and turn it over to Peter, I want to share with you that the reason that I talk about digital transformations being infinite is that we're not done with technology innovation. For example, we're seeing we have a partnership with a company called 3Kit that makes augmented reality solutions, essentially e-commerce, come to life, so that you can increase conversions because it's more tangible and reduce returns. And once a customer experiences something new like this, it becomes transformative. It breaks the static 2D e-commerce digital catalog style of experience and brings it to life in a much more meaningful way. Then we see the hybrid nature of digital in retail, where we can bring to life goods and packaged goods as a means of just understanding and better connecting with the products that we want. We're starting to see, while this is much more of an artistic display, you could do anything with a storefront or shelves or walls or space itself to bring to life experiences. I would also say that some of the work that we're doing in our Commerce Cloud group, which is experimenting with pilots with startups who are coming up, for example, in this case, where stores, like if you've ever shopped for a home or just browsed for a home on Zillow or Redfin, you can 3D tour the house where you virtually walk through the home, turn around, experience it in a way as if you were there. And that's what this startup is doing with particular stores. It's turning flagship stores into shoppable experiences so that we can break that 2D static digital catalog model. But if you look at even Facebook's work, right, it's the digital transformation of work itself is underway. This is, they're experimenting with augmented reality and virtual reality. This is a virtual reality experiment of how you might work in the future. But this is what they're working on right now. So at some point it's inevitable. And we know that Apple, for example, has Glass that is going to be debuting here soon meaning the next 1 to 2 years. But all of these things become transformative and continually transformative, changing where that bar is for that state we're trying to achieve, just realizing that digital transformation is a constant and that essentially we combine a digital transformation model that looks at making improvements, finding opportunities for net new value, and constantly exploring these models. In the Harvard research that we recently published, we broke it down into a few steps to at least help you get started on those 6 stages of digital transformation, which was having first a true customer-centered mindset, which is understanding that we're not our customers. We are employees of an organization governed by governance, policies, procedures, leadership perspectives, roles and responsibilities. So we have to take that customer-centered mindset and then apply data against that mindset in order to drive insights for making improvements and exploring new opportunities. And then using those insights to drive operational transformation and essentially creating a customer and employee-centered workplace. And I'll leave you with this. It's that since there is no playbook, there's a lot of ambiguity. And because there are no yet formal roles and responsibilities for this new world, we have to define them. And so that means that the roles and responsibilities for digital transformation can come from anywhere. And I think that's why we're together today, is that they can come from us. And that's the point. We have to create this. That's why it's so hard, but that's also why this is a competitive advantage. That the more that we all become leaders and the more that we define these new roles for leadership in this new era of digital transformation and constant digital transformation, then the more we grow as individuals, the more we learn, and the more that we become ultimately the digital transformers that will help make businesses much more relevant in this time and as times change. So with that, I'll say thank you and turn it over to my colleague, Peter.
Thank you, Brian. Yeah, I have to tell all of you how much I always look forward to doing these sessions with Brian, because you never step in the same river twice, and neither Brian nor I ever gives the same presentation twice. I always get new insights into what he's been thinking about. But to some degree, there is a playbook that we follow in these sessions where Brian does an amazing job of showing you an open road and inviting you to imagine the speed and the maneuverability and the opportunity that creates. And then to some degree, I come in with the opposite half of the yang yin relationship and talk about the guardrails on that road, talk about the degree to which, even though there is no playbook, there are things that are bad ideas, and maybe also offer, I hope, some other examples of how people have taken on this challenge and thrived in meaningful ways. One of the things I like to open with is the observation, and work with me for a second. This sounds like we've suddenly gone to astronomy class, that about a little over 4 years ago, some photons of light energy left Proxima Centauri at about 2 in the afternoon Pacific time, and they are going to hit the surface of the Earth at about the time that we all finish our session today. That sounds like a prediction, but really, is it a prediction? They're on their way. We know they're on their way. It's really a future that's already happened. And to a large extent, I hope that what Brian and I are doing for you today is not predicting, but is showing what is already in progress, the things that are already falling and going to hit you if you are not prepared for them, or alternatively, the opportunities that will be opening, the light that will be dawning for us, that we can confidently say is a future that's already in progress. Among the challenges is that business people are taught to do forecasting, which is largely the math of a future like the past. We are taught to make predictions based on cyclical trends and exponential smoothing, and create reports for management decision making. And even as recently as the winter of 2020, this is how the discipline of forecasting was being described to college students. And I think we can all agree that that notion of forecasting as extrapolating past behavior into future events is maybe something that needs to be challenged. For example, there was a period a few weeks ago when people were being warned it was going to take a week to get that boat out of the canal, and then they were being told, well, gosh, it could take it could take a month, and then all of a sudden it was gone. And if you were making decisions about routing cargo ships around the Horn of Africa instead of through the canal, making decisions that had impact, your notion of what is a forecasting model, what is a predictive model, how do I deal with this future, were, shall we say, in flux. Planning for an incident is what we've been taught to do, but really what we need is to build a process for a cycle. I stole this graphic from Hong Kong Baptist University, of all places, where they talked about their process for dealing with things like the pandemic, not as an incident, but as an ongoing cycle of what's our risk profile, what's our strategy for dealing with the risks we understand, how well are we doing at implementing those measures, and then evaluate, did it work? And by the way, what are the new risks? When I saw this graphic, it reminded me of something developed by an Air Force colonel named John Boyd called the OODA loop, Observe, Orient, Decide, Act, which is how he taught fighter pilots to win in aerial combat. Notice that the loss of any 4 of these is fatal. If you are not observing, you do not know what is happening. If you do not orient yourself to those observations, you haven't really figured out if the target is in front of you or behind you or to the side. You need to make a decision. What am I going to do? Am I going to evade? Am I going to attack? Am I going to make some other kind of maneuver? And you need to act. Slow down any of those 4 steps or eliminate any of those 4 steps and the entire loop fails. If your loop, on the other hand, as the late Colonel Boyd would say, if your loop is tighter than the other guy's loop, you are going to be the one shooting at him and not the other way around, which is where you want to be. But the essential ingredient to all of this is data. Observe and orient. This is the data piece. And most companies know that their data collection is not what it needs to be. Data emerges in most organizations as the byproduct of their own activity and is studied as the record of what has been done before. And then they all took the same forecasting classes and try to predict what will happen next. But when companies are asked about their data, they will candidly admit half of their data goes into an archival system. It may be reported to the stockholders or the regulators, but it is not used to eliminate forward-looking decisions. And they know this is a risk. They understand that failure to capitalize upon and use data as an illumination tool and not just a record mechanism is one of the most important competencies, and that all the digital transformation in the world is just an engine with no fuel if the data problem is not addressed. The problems include the degree to which it just takes a long time for data to flow through the organization. If you've seen the movie Ford versus Ferrari, there is a wonderful moment when Carroll Shelby observes the same red folder being handed from person to person to person until it winds up on the decision maker's desk. The question of how long can a report take before it is so out of date that it should not be used as a basis for decision making, and also the nature of change. Exponential growth, a widely abused phrase. The word exponential does not just mean really, really fast. It means something very specific, because we tend to think of change in S-curves. We undertake projects. We anticipate technology changes as being a period of steady state, and then an innovation happens, and then things level off where we think they will. Some of us think we're being more aggressive and forward-looking. We say, no, the new norm is constant ongoing change. I've replotted that S-curve on a different curve with the same initial takeoff, but then it keeps changing. And you might think that that's a much more vigorous and future-ready point of view until you compare those curves to actual exponential growth. When if you're looking out 5 or 10 years ahead, the difference can be a factor of 4, 6, 8, 10, 20. And if you're at that divergence point where people want to believe that the investments they've just made are going to start having ROI for the next several years without a lot more investment being required, or some are on that green curve and saying, no, you're being too timid. We got to be ready for ongoing change. And you're the one on the red curve. You're the one saying, look, we need to be prepared not merely for continuing change, but for acceleration of that change. Well, leadership is a necessity to get people to view that not as perilous risk, but as opportunity to redefine the rules of the game. Because it is not just the speed that's the challenge. We can deal with fast as long as we're a little bit faster. And if a plane is flying and the air can get out of the way, everything is fine. But at a critical moment, the environment is not keeping up with the pace of change. And this is when you get that sound barrier, when you get that breaking of the sound barrier, and from then on, you're generating shock waves. If you've ever been to an air show and a supersonic aircraft has gone by, you literally do not hear it coming. You don't hear anything until it's already past you. And if it flies over your house, the first warning you get is the breaking of the glass. The idea that we need to build systems that don't do exponential smoothing based on past behavior, don't even rely on listening carefully. Remember, how many times have people told you, you've got to be a good listener, you've got to listen to your customers, you've got to listen for what your competitors are doing. Listening won't do it. You need over the horizon radar. You need to be looking at demographic change. You need to be looking at research in the laboratories that will turn into technologies ready to come to market and products that will compete against you with a kind of speed that's simply not happened before. There's a great photo that's occasionally shown of the 35 products you can no longer sell because iPhones do all those things, ranging from an alarm clock and a camera to what people used to buy a dedicated handheld, a GPS receiver to do, all the things that have now been subsumed into that one device. That's not a change that could have been predicted by studying the behavior in any of the markets for any of those devices. You could not predict the future of alarm clocks by studying the industry of people who made alarm clocks. You had to be looking at a much wider way at what's going on, because it used to be that listening would give you warnings. Today, maybe it gives you an explanation. Tomorrow, it's not even going to be an excuse. We used to say you want to be a responsive organization. And even as recently as 4 or 5 years ago, people would say, no, 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 it's going to be about AI. We're going to be an intelligent organization. There's only so much that intelligence can accomplish when your real need is to be able to deal with things like a ship stuck in the Suez Canal, and you have to be prepared for many different possible outcomes. You have to be, in fact, resilient. Because the past year, this pandemic year, in some ways, it was just a proof of concept. If you look at McKinsey data, the World Uncertainty Index, the Geopolitical Risk Index, cyber breaches, natural disasters, and Brian, I think, has already alluded to this, the amount of change that's going on and the degree to which it makes mock of what we used to call our plans is a reality we're going to be dealing with for a long time. To put it in very concrete terms, for example, McKinsey is saying you will typically have a multi-month supply chain disruption on the order of every 4 years. That's just one simple data point. And the degree to which you need to factor resilience in and not merely cost optimization into your planning is one of the characteristics of that environment. And so the OODA loop is in some ways too simple. This is a more interesting version of it that observes that the observations will be affected by noise and distortion. The orientation may be biased by previous experience or even cultural tradition. The act of making decisions and the act of feeding forward into action. These are all areas in which leadership is required to challenge people's desire for comfort, to challenge their belief that what has happened in the past predicts what will happen in the future. All of these things are made more necessary, but are not guaranteed by having done a digital transformation. You can create the data sources, but getting people to look at them and to believe them, even when they aren't comfortable with what they say, is what leadership is really going to have to be about. The degree to which businesses need to actively seek data that makes them angry, data that makes them uncomfortable. Annie Flippo at the Department of Defense once said, if you think you're a data scientist and you're not making people angry, you're probably not doing anything very useful, because organizations look for confirming evidence. The problem is that data is now so cheap, so abundant, and of such high quality that finding confirming evidence to validate your prior beliefs is easier than ever before. And actually going out and trying to find data that will contradict what you want to believe is really now something that requires conviction and a degree of courage. The challenges include the fact that we're very, very good at building individual silos, and Brian has already mentioned this as well. Moore's law will happily give you a bigger, faster, stronger, more robust silo for every single activity you undertake. And those bigger, faster, stronger silos will do a better job of preventing you from seeing the change, the revolutionary emergence of new competitors, the novel behaviors of customers whose acceptance and demand for digital engagement were hugely accelerated during the past year. And you can see, for example, that people say the data we have isn't usable for decision making. It's fine for archival, but it isn't framed in a way that enables decision making, that they don't have the tools and time to find the value in it because their analytic disciplines are still spreadsheets and pie charts. And 98% of them say the biggest problem is that simply getting data from a place of origin to a place of orientation, to a place of decision, to a place of action, to make that OODA loop be a loop and not just a broken down bunch of silos. 98% say they have trouble building their data pipelines. And sometimes they say their pipelines break daily because things are changed at one end that break the other, because people are doing copy and paste swivel chair integration of their data. This is among the reasons why the Salesforce of now is almost unrecognizable compared to the Salesforce of only 4 years ago, because people think of us as having rehabilitated customer relationship management. And we did. When the company was founded, people logged into their CRM on Friday afternoon to get paid. And the biggest accomplishment of the first 10 years was getting people to log in on Monday morning looking for performance improvement, looking for guidance, and not merely looking to record their past action. That digital transformation began 20 years ago. The accomplishment of getting people to look at a tool that had always functioned merely as a system of record and re-envision it as a tool for guiding action and improving performance. That's not something the technology does for you. It requires getting people to be the bell cows of that change, getting the people regarded as the exemplars of superior performance to be the leaders in the adoption and use of that technology. And then when you look at what we've done in just the last 4 years, we've brought in the ability to connect to all the data outside of you, not merely to connect your silos, which was a challenge. There was research we did with Deloitte that showed the typical company needing to look in 39 separate systems, ranging from email to spreadsheets to ERP, to assemble a complete picture of its interactions, even with a customer they already had, let alone with the customers they were actively seeking to engage anew. Well, bringing in MuleSoft cost us $6.5 billion US, but now we were able to say, you can look at the data that's outside your silos as well. But that's so overwhelming. Well, another couple of $1 billion, we bring in Datarama to combine those sources of data into a single representation. Bring in Tableau. Remember, we talked about managers saying they did not have time to find the value in data. Well, now there's more visual tools that don't require professional analytics or statistics training, and then bringing in Velocity to put that all in industry perspective. That's probably the last thing I'm going to say that's specifically about anything we sell. And so, among your challenges is that when you look around, things look pretty good. But if you walk into a room, it doesn't look too bad until you start sweeping the floor. And when you get to the corner and all the dirt has been brought together in one place, you're kind of shocked and appalled to realize how messy the room actually was. It was just so dispersed that it was easy to overlook. The same is true of data in most organizations, that it is only when you try to bring it all together and maybe start feeding it into a machine learning algorithm that you discover how many inconsistencies or errors or gaps or anachronisms and time lags there were in that data. And so the Arab proverb that the best time to plant a tree for shade was 20 years ago and the second best time is right now. Well, the same is true for data. The best time to begin the data migration and hygiene required to take advantage of modern tools probably was about 3 years ago. But unless you have that time machine thing, which would be really useful to have right about now, the need to do it immediately, even if you think an AI adoption might still be a year or two out ahead, the urgency of getting the data house in order to enable all the other good things that a transformation can provide must be treated as paramount. The examples that we can offer include customers who have looked around and said, oh my gosh, to identify what we're doing with any single customer, we've got 16 separate fragments of the business that are each interacting with the same customers in many cases. Pulling them all together allowed the company to stop thinking of separate lines of business in connection with a customer and to see, in fact, the customer. And Brian's already mentioned this, to really make the customer the focus, not as the target of multiple separate campaigns from different lines of the business, but rather to say, hey, what's your life journey here? What are the decisions you, Mr. and Mrs. Customer, are going to be making? How can we be part of that? How can we maybe interact with one of our partners to assemble a complete picture of your needs so that you come to us, even if you're not going to be getting something from us, you come to us for advice and recommendation, and we become your gateway into a community of solving your problem. That is an important transformation that a company can only undertake by choice. It will not happen by accident, because it is a challenge to think outside the box. The expression think outside the box, not to see the boundaries imagined around those 9 dots. So you say, wait a minute, I can connect those with 4 lines, but the boundary of I've imagined on my solution has to get out of the way. The edge comes from building interoperable services. You don't have to do it all. You don't have to own it all or invent it all, but you do have to see it all. And this is a comment that's been made in the national defense community, that individually perfect systems may not interact with each other, and the result is a breakdown in mission effectiveness. And zooming out and asking, wait a minute, what is my customer actually trying to do? My customer is not buying a refrigerator. My customer is buying storage for food in a healthy manner that makes it easier to take care of their family and entertain guests. Okay, now that we've redefined the refrigerator, not as a box that keeps things cold, but as a piece of enablement for health, safety, and enjoyable entertainment, now we can start to think about things that box might do, or that a network connection for that box might provide, that would not have come to us if we were simply trying to optimize a box of cold air. And so thinking of every edge in that box, not as a boundary on what you do, but as an opportunity to interact with what is the customer doing before or during or after they're using the thing you used to think was your product. Your product is the enabler for a customer outcome. Almost no one actually wants your product. I mean, that sounds like a funny thing to say, but other than, luxury goods where people really do have pride of ownership of an object, most things are bought to make something else possible. And the ability to imagine if your product could disappear and leave only its outcome behind can be a very freeing thing. It's like that moment in the movie Searching for Bobby Fischer, when the chess coach says, here, I'll make it easy for you, and sweeps all the pieces off the board, because those pieces can clutter your view. And see the board, see the opportunity for meeting the customer need. This is something that Credit Andorra did, and I know it's another financial services example, but it's such an interesting one, because they said to their departments, we will not allow you to build better systems until we've had a cross-organizational conversation about the customer and built a data model that represents the customer in its entirety, the entire customer, not just their interaction with any single silo of the business. Among the challenges is that people think of AI also in a siloed kind of way. And a while ago, I started asking the question, what if AI were not an artifact, an object being built to replace badly a person? What if we saw AI as a list of verbs? It automates, it predicts, it plans, it recognizes new situations, it optimizes our actions. And I realized with the help of a colleague that we could construct a different acronym, not artificial intelligence, but appropriate intelligence. The verbs of effect that these technologies can provide. Among the reasons this is really helpful is that it makes people less likely to see AI as being intended to replace them, and more as a power tool intended to help them become more valuable. And at that point, support for their adoption and refinement of the goals. You get much more cooperation from people who think they're building a tool for themselves. And this is an example. A university said, what are the real pain points in the customer experience of a new student arriving in college? It turned out that some of their biggest challenges were having students show up with their financial and their medical paperwork in order. And these were huge sources of wasted time and loss of energy in getting the academic year underway. And so what they did is work with the people who were on the phone with the students all summer and say, what are the things they don't understand? How can we make that work? They built a chatbot, fairly straightforward piece of what some people would call AI, but it was rooted in the experience of the people who'd been on the front line with the customer, and the results were extraordinary. 37% improvement in freshmen arriving for their first year of college with all their medical paperwork in order, 74% improvement in having all the financial requirements addressed. It's tempting to think that AI is for doing the hard things, when really in many cases, its biggest leverage is doing ordinary simple things in a more responsive and consistent and 24/7 available way. And you'll only find that out by going to the people on the front lines of customer interaction and saying, what is your experience of where the customer's pain is unnecessarily great and where a small amount of leverage could make the biggest difference? And to do this, we say, look, you've got to talk to your service agents. You've got to identify the top 10 questions they get, develop articles, develop channels, develop a voice and a tone, and treat it as a customer exercise, not a technology exercise. As Brian has heard me say many times, the two things wrong with the phrase digital transformation are the adjective and the noun. Calling it digital makes it sound like a technology adoption challenge, and calling it transformation makes it sound like a simple step change. And in most cases, the adoption of the technology enables the more interesting part, which is going not to a process, but to a culture in which customer engagement is what people now realize they are there to do. Peter Drucker has commented on the sources of innovation. There are three that I think are crucial. Identifying a moment of incongruity, when you say with, through the eye of the child, why do we put up with this? This makes no sense. Your customers can tell you this if they actually believe you'll be paying attention to them. Is there new knowledge that would allow us to take that incongruity that we thought was a necessary evil and fix it? Is there a perception challenge that if we try to change that, people will try to cling to what is familiar to them? And do we need to change the way they see what we're doing before they will regard that as an improvement? If you don't have all three of these, you probably don't have really important, meaningful change. And the degree to which this happens, when we get the silos of people broken down, as well as the silos of data, is key. The interesting thing is that Peter Drucker talked about this happening 20 years from 1989. So it's now been 12 years since he wrote in The New Realities that we would be having these changes happen. And yet here we are. It's 2021. And if I talk about breaking down the silos and building a collaborative organization and building an operating system of discovery and working together on things, I become Slack and I sell my company for $28 billion to Salesforce. Isn't it remarkable that this is still a novelty? Well, we're really working hard on making it the norm for how things go forward. Because this dates back to our own experience, and I know you wanted some examples of leadership. In 2006, we were only a 7-year-old company, and we were already beginning to show symptoms of congestion and inertia and accumulation of legacy practices. I was a 7-year-old company in an industry regarded as one of the the centerpieces of technology change. Well, we had a top-down leadership change to adopt what are sometimes called Scrum or Agile processes, which many people were skeptical of applying in the world of enterprise software. They said, oh, you can do that kind of thing for lightweight stuff. You can do that for gaming or retail websites, but you can't build a real enterprise tool that way. Well, we did it. And Forbes named us the world's most innovative company in the top 3 of the list that they published for 8 years in a row, the only company ever to be in the top 3 in every year that they published that list. Their methodology has since changed, but it's still a remarkable observation that we were able to maintain that membership in that group for such a long time. A lot of it had to do with building mechanisms and tools that enabled the transformation to be a change of behavior and not just an adoption of a technology. Among the things that are key is making sure that people who have different perspectives are talking to each other, are collaborating on solving problems, instead of getting the situation where the experts are peer reviewing each other's papers, but they're not really being informed by perspectives from outside their industry. One of the things we've always really loved doing at Salesforce is bringing customers together from completely different businesses. And you get someone who's in casino gambling talking with someone who's in military defense, talking with someone who's in higher education, and they discover how many challenges they face in common, but that they are addressing in very different ways. And you can measure this. I'm about to follow Brian's rule here. You'll work with me for a second. This is a diagram of the relationships of patent holders in one well-known, highly innovative company. This is a diagram of the relationships in another. You notice that in one, it's a very concentrated network, and the other, it is much more dispersed. And if you're wondering which companies are they, well, Steve Jobs is the dot in the center of the left. So Brian, there I am with my Steve Jobs reference. And the other one is Google. And the observation has been made that Apple has a very focused innovation culture in which ideas come from the people who are supposed to have ideas. Johnny Ive, Sir Johnny Ive, excuse me, Steve Jobs and other key leaders are regarded as the focal points of innovation. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but you need to realize you've done it and ask yourself if you might do better to do what Google has done and build a much more open sourced, collaborative, many people with an opportunity to initiate ideas kind of culture. Our own culture at Salesforce is much more like that. And this has been observed to be a key challenge in many disciplines. There's a thing called multi-crew coordination, where aircraft pilots are now being taught as an explicit skill to collaborate on the flight deck, because it was discovered that so many planes crash because different people are each doing a right thing, but not working together to produce the right result. Ditto in medical care, where individual specialists were not necessarily being taught to coordinate with each other and patient outcomes are being compromised. This is a skill. It is not the way most organizations hire or train or reward, and it needs to be explicitly introduced if you're going to get the benefits of data integration and technology change. For example, Kimberly-Clark said, wait a minute, if we sell workplace hygiene products, cleaning solutions and cleaning tools and things, but we're just competing on price with everybody else. What if we sold the outcome? What if we sold a healthy workplace as the outcome? They built a tool that allows their people to visit a workplace, take the managers on a tour of their own office or restaurant or factory, making note of hygiene and safety issues, and at the end, having these all digested into a workplace hygiene and safety report. And also it happens to include easy on-ramps to the products that Kimberly-Clark sells that can address these problems. But they keep most of the focus of the conversation on the problem being solved. Likewise, New England Biolabs, which sells protease restriction enzymes for chopping up DNA. Well, they got the inspiration at one of our conferences from a Coca-Cola freestyle machine to observe the manner in which the different things they sold are being used in combinations, and to turn what used to be just a refrigerator into an actual research protocol management tool. And it elevated what they sell from bottles of chemicals to active partnership in their customers' research programs, which is not something they had ever imagined before. So to some degree, in summary, Conway's law says that organizations build systems that look like their org charts. And if you want to build something genuinely different, you have to be prepared to rip up and redesign your organization chart itself, because people will otherwise, build things in modules that reflect the communication network they have. Are you prepared to do that? Goodhart's law says that as soon as a number becomes a target, it stops being useful as a measure of anything, because people will find a way to game the system and achieve their target, even if it was not what the outcome you originally intended. Look at that. When people say we're a data-driven organization, ask them, are you measuring the things that are easy to measure, or are you measuring the outcomes that are important to achieve? Because the second one is what's going to lead you in good places, and the first one can be wildly dysfunctional. The bumblebee tuna law of project names is something I named after hearing something said by the chief marketing officer of the guy at the company that puts tuna fish in cans. He said, we have a rule here that we cannot name a project for a technology that it acquires or deploys, or for an activity that it performs. A project must be named for the outcome it pursues. It can be named supply chain acceleration. It can be named customer churn reduction. It has to be named for a business result. It cannot be named ERP upgrade, for example, because that's just a technology action. It's not an outcome. And finally, Houghton's rule: don't try to solve problems by adding complexity to them. He coined the term simplicate and add lightness. This was stolen by Anthony Colin-Bruce Chapman at Lotus Cars, who said, adding power makes you faster on the straights, but lightness makes you faster everywhere. And that's a key observation. It's easy to think that you'll solve a problem by introducing additional communications. Someone at Motorola once said, if you have a 22-step process, you're never going to get faster by speeding up the 22 steps. You need to look at that process and say, of those 22 steps, which ones don't belong here? Which ones are cases where something is going up 3 levels for approval, when it would be cheaper to have someone with the frontline judgment take the action, measure the result, and quickly decide if calibration is required. Push the intelligence to the edge, push the power to make decisions with that intelligence, and then tighten the OODA loops so that people get to observe, orient, decide, act, and repeat. Make it experimental. The future is hard. In 1963, they built this building at JFK Airport that was supposed to be the very futuristic, TWA terminal. It looked a lot like this. And 5 years later, when the movie 2001, A Space Odyssey came out, darned if the space station in Earth orbit didn't look an awful lot like the TWA terminal at JFK, which has now been lovingly rehabilitated and resurrected as a retro-themed 1963 hotel, even though it was supposed to look like the future when it was built. And it still has the rotary dial telephones. It's hard to get the future right. So rather than trying to get the future right, make yourself future ready, not future proof, future ready, which is what Accenture has defined as being a combination of intelligent operations, good OODA loops, greater agility, more rapid ability to change your mind when you see something happen that you didn't expect. Use the advanced technologies to support those goals, but make sure you're thinking of it as an exercise in coordinating data, gaining insight from that data, and applying intelligence to energize that data. It lowers expenses, it improves profits. And recognize that when you beam up into a starship, you'd better arrive on the bridge of the ship, moving as fast as the ship is moving. Because if you arrive on that ship and it's doing warp 1 and you materialize as a stationary object, you're going to get smacked in the back by the bulkhead of the ship because it's still moving. And projects that transform you must also bring you up to speed in a very literal kind of way, so that the outcome of the transformation is a organization that understands from now on, we're not just going to be moving, we're going to be accelerating. That's what we had to share with you, and I would welcome the chance to find out what you think about it.
All right, thank you. Thanks so much, Peter. So maybe as our guests are getting ready to ask questions, how there's this famous saying, it's either goes to Ford or it goes to Steve Jobs. How do you actually prepare when we're talking about the customer experience? How do you deliver a product to your customers that they don't yet know that they need? So how do you actually define something new, something that has not been seen before, just saying, hey, you know what, you actually need a smartphone. Nobody told us that you need a smartphone, but you need the iPhone.
Yeah, Ford probably never actually said that his customers only have asked him for a faster horse, although it's widely attributed to him. That one really
it's not.
Worst. Steve Jobs, on the other hand, has been sourced as saying he didn't believe in focus groups because people don't know what they want until you show it to them. And that's an absolutely accurate challenge. Is how do you bring something to people they've never seen before? Brian, what are your thoughts on that one?
Oh my goodness, I was looking forward. You're getting wild.
If you want me to go first, I will. I mean, the way I'll go first by saying Peter Sondergaard, when he was still at Gartner, said the old market research would ask people, what do you want? And that's a famously broken model for getting people to talk about what they've never seen. But what he observed is that we don't have to ask them what they want now, because we can measure what they seem to be trying to do. We can track their movements through a website, and if we're looking at it correctly, we can infer the problem they're trying to solve. Google has transformed itself from a white pages phone book where you went to look for the name of a company to a yellow pages phone book where you went to look for a category of solution to an answerer of questions. Google will tell you the thing that people search with today is not, I need a widget. It's, I'm having this problem. And if you don't emerge from a search that's looking for answers to questions, because all you are is a seller of objects, you might as well be invisible on Google these days. And asking yourself always, wait a minute, what's the underlying need that made them think they want the object is just something that comes from spending as much time as you can observing, measuring, analyzing, getting out in the field, doing the ride along, walking through the store with the customer, figuring out how they spotted the product that they chose every moment in time. When did someone recognize you as a possible solution? Were they able to purchase you? Were they able to unwrap you? Do you know that when Microsoft put the start button on the Windows screen, and to shut down the machine, you had to click start to find the thing that says shut down? Hewlett-Packard built an alternative to the Windows desktop that Microsoft made them remove because they said that they owned the visual copyright on Windows. And they said, no, Hewlett Packard, you can't invent a different interface for Windows. Hewlett Packard documented an 8% increase in the return of perfectly good machines to the store because people simply couldn't figure out things like the start button is how you shut it down. So there's no substitute for spending time with people. At Aetna, what they actually did is walk around the office with cameras and took pictures of people at their desks and then interviewed them and said, why are these things on your desk? Why do you need these things to do your job? Because they realized that to build a digital work tool, it had to have all the information sources and all of the levers and knobs of action that people wanted to take in the digital environment, or they'd wind up looking at a screen and then going back to a clipboard. And it's an anthropological challenge. And Brian, this is a segue into you, because I mean, you're as much an anthropologist as a technologist, probably more so.
I could listen to you all day. I think there's a quote, something along the lines of the light bulb did not come from the continuous improvement of candles, and that's always had me fascinated in understanding that when you come up with that thing that you don't know you want, but then you can't live without it once you see it, that Steve Jobs was so good at. As Peter mentioned earlier, when you name a project for an outcome, that's sort of what Steve Jobs, I think, was really good at. He saw problems and found solutions that solved those problems. So going back to the graphical user interface or the mouse that he saw at Xerox PARC, those solved problems for how people navigated with computers. And he knew that something like that would help the adoption, the integration of a computer in everyday life. If you look at iTunes, he was solving the problem. He didn't invent the MP3, but he did solve the problem of how people integrated and managed their digital music libraries. If you look at the iPhone or the iPod, everything solved a problem, created a solution that once you had it, you recognized that you were able to leave behind all of the friction that was involved with the previous experience to generate something new. So if we go back to that quote about candles, it's true that light bulbs weren't the result of the continuous improvement of candles, but they were the result over the continuous improvement of the benefit of light. And I think that was the outcome of which then is led to every subsequent iteration and innovation when it comes to light. And so that, I think, is one way of seeing it, is as Peter was mentioning, is like it is there's friction everywhere to do business with you today. And when you take it from the perspective of, well, hey, what is the friction of communication? Well, somebody communicates today with text, TikTok, WhatsApp. There's every instance of which we can take from other industries to understand where we can improve that friction today, introduce new things that become the new standards. And it just gets to the point of asking different questions and seeing things from their perspective. It's why one of the reasons why I always add I think Peter's heard me say this, an apostrophe S to customer experience. It's the customer's experience. And when we force ourselves to look at it through their perspective, then we can see things that even we couldn't see before, and then we can't unsee it then.
The iPod example is so instructive because at the end of the movie titled Steve Jobs, with Michael Fassbender playing Steve, there's a wonderful moment when he says to his daughter, I'm going to put your favorite 100 songs in your pocket. No, your favorite 1,000 songs in your pocket. And Ray Wang has observed that when the iPod was introduced, Sony alone had 3 different divisions competing in a well understood market for MP3 players. They were a product. And Steve said, no one wants to own an MP3 player. They want their favorite songs in their pocket. And that led him to say, well, the problem now is that once you've got the MP3 player, you're on your own to go find content, whether it's legal or of high quality or whatever. And he began with the assumption that it was unacceptable to give people an empty container and not give them a way to fill it. And then he created this notion of going to the record companies and say, I'm going to give you 99 cents a song for your songs. And if you won't participate, well, I'm sure your friends will, your competitors will. And he did something that had been so long assumed to be impossible. I mean, Sony thought that they were in the catbird seat because they could sell MP3 players, and they also owned Sony Records. They thought they had the whole walled garden underway. And Steve said, that's not what people want. And he just presented people with it as almost a fait accompli in his so-called reality distortion field. was the ability to show people something and have them realize, oh my gosh, this is what I wanted all along. I just assumed I could not have this. It's friction, rust, and gravity. And it's also a problem that I discuss with our own account teams, because companies don't write an RFP for what they don't realize even exists. Companies don't go into the marketplace looking for bids for anti-gravity. And if you have anti-gravity, you can't wait for a chance to sell it to someone who comes looking for it. You have to go out there and show it. And you have to have the conviction that this is going to meet a need. And these are singular virtues.
Yeah.
But today they can be informed by data, Peter Sondergaard's point. Now we can measure what people seem to be trying to do. Uber is a great example of this. You've probably heard in your economics class.
Peter,
Sorry, another question.
Yeah. Another question, and that's actually a question to.
We'll talk about Uber later.
Yeah. To Brian, how do you believe it's possible to embrace the aspect of think digital first that you've mentioned in a traditional consumer good company like Nestle? Do you see any opportunity looking from outside or as a customer? And then the second question for you, Brian, is that you've mentioned about the challenge of the culture of resistance, typically seen in digital transformation or any kind of the change. How do you recommend us to handle with that consideration? We have employees from different generations working with us.
Well, think digital first is more of a mantra of how would someone approach coming back to the Steve Jobs example, right? You're solving for friction. And so we use digital as a means to reduce that friction. There's a saying that technology is at its best when it's invisible. And so if we think about, we often talk about this at Salesforce, what are the jobs to be done? And if you look at that from the customer's perspective, if the customer has a problem, what is their job to be done? Or if the customer is looking to bring the most out of a product or an experience, what is that job to be done, so that we can solve for that? And then when we apply the think digital first to it, is how do we use technology to, in a frictionless way, in an intuitive way, get the customer to that outcome? That's one way, and there are several exercises that you could use to help achieve those types of outcomes. But I will say that they're often counterintuitive to what it is that you would think in order to solve for that. And perhaps maybe that's a follow-on conversation. Marcia, I do want to say that I was starting to answer your question and I hit enter too soon because then I got prompted to answer the question live. So I will get to your question eventually. And then the other question was, I lost track of that. Is customer experience of CX is important to be considered while investing in digital solutions? So this is a really, if I understand the question right, and I know Peter's going to have something to say about this, I have a concept internally that we're piloting with certain customers around what we call what I call, it's not an official Salesforce thing yet. It's called D2C RM. So it's taking this premise of a digital first direct to consumer company, but treating it like a startup as a means of connecting either with, let's say, retail partners or directly with consumers to get data, to start ingesting data from customers and building the skill sets and the foundation necessary to support a direct-to-consumer business, and treating it like its own internal startup, but then using that startup to feed the rest of the organization, not just data, but also new ways of cross-functionally collaborating around common sense of purpose and also outcomes. So for example, I can say that there's a global consumer goods brand that we all know and love, and they were looking at not solving for what I just said in terms of getting customer data and building stronger customer relationships, customer insights. They just wanted to create a D2C brand because that's what you're supposed to do. And they, accordingly, though, when you think about it that way, in terms of, as Peter talked about, the adjective and the noun of digital transformation, it was just essentially creating a digital first brand, but not necessarily a relevant, meaningful brand that was going to nurture relationships. And they understaffed it, they under-resourced it, and of course, it didn't perform to expectations. Like, why didn't we have the next Warby Parker? So the point of building a D2CRM infrastructure is essentially the outcome of getting the insights necessary to feed the rest of the business, but also the insights and the ability, the mechanisms to better engage customers in a way that, like a startup might, that you start to learn how to do along the way. It's a bigger question than I have time for, but I hope that at least gets things helpful. And if it's okay, I just want to finish my thought to Marcia because I don't think I'll have it typed in time. She was asking about culture and digital transformation, and I will say that in every application that I personally worked on, we had to address culture transformation before digital transformation. And that is part of establishing new leadership roles. You have to get everybody comfortable with stepping outside of their comfort zones in order to work towards agreed upon mutual outcomes and milestones, and then the incentivization for everybody that helps essentially incentivize them to move in new directions than they were working toward yesterday. I've mentioned this in previous conversations that one of the most arguably creative but also most insightful cultural transformation organizations is Gaping Void. They work on essentially culture design, and it's an intentional design in order to get an outcome like digital transformation or innovation. And they have a lot of free resources that can help answer your question, Marcia, beyond the time that we have allotted. So hopefully that helps.
Awesome, thank you. And we also have a question from Denier, who's actually the first question. What is the recipe to keep us updated on this digital journey? So I assume that it's on an organizational level.
Peter, you want to take that?
I'm sorry, updated in what sense?
Yeah, updated in terms of, I assume that on the corporate level, how the corporation can communicate and keep everyone updated on the digital journey that the company undertakes.
Oh, okay. Yeah, over communicate. If there's one thing that we learned during the pandemic year, it's that the appetite to hear candid, trusted updates on where things are going, not only from the top of the org chart, but to hear from your peers about the challenges that they're encountering and to collaborate with them is priceless. You've heard the expression, people join companies, but they quit managers. Today, I would say people join companies, but they quit managers and cultures. And someone said just the other day, people don't leave you because they're underpaid or underrespected. They leave because they were stopped. They leave because they had a contribution they wanted to offer, and no one even gave them the courtesy of saying no. They just felt that their energy and their insight was going into a hole. Building a culture in which people feel that there's not merely a suggestion box, but that the suggestions are being read, considered, a tiger team formed. There's a rule at one company that if you can get 2 other people to sign on, you'll be told, okay, go ahead and try that. Go ahead and pilot project that. Because if you can get at least 2 other people to agree that it's worth some effort, then it probably should be tried. The company in question was Valve, which is an electronic gaming company. And so Google is famous for this idea that you should spend 20% of your time on projects of your own, but I think Valve's got it right. You need to show that there's at least 2 other people collaborating. I think that's a useful hurdle to clear, but it shouldn't be more than that. It shouldn't be more than that. So being up to date is people being motivated to communicate at least as much as it is they're being allowed to communicate. And the communication needs to be up, down, and sideways, and not just the regular everything's going great bulletin from the top of the tower that is both uninformative and in many cases not believed. Measure. Well, we have an internal tool at Salesforce called V2MOM, Vision, Values, Methods, Obstacles, Measures, where we start with a company plan for the year. And by the time we've gone through the cycle, every individual employee has built their own personal V2MOM. This is what I believe is the vision for why my job exists. These are the values that inform how I pursue that vision. These are the methods I undertake to address the vision within the scope of those values. Here are the obstacles I expect to encounter. Well, that list is in a way your own challenge to you. Gee, who should I be collaborating inside the company or exploring outside the company with? And finally, measures. This is how I want to be evaluated. Well, we finished the OODA loop by looping those measures back into the reporting system, and you have regular reviews with your manager saying, hey, how are you doing on your measures? Oh, that's interesting. You're getting a good number on that measure, and yet you're still concerned. how do we recalibrate that? And so it isn't just a meaningless rubber stamp process. We live it. If it's not in the V2 Mom, then why are you working on it? If you're working on it, why isn't it in your V2 Mom? And how are you measuring whether you're getting it done? And that creation of both the possibility and the motivation for communication are both key.
Awesome. Awesome. Peter, thank you so much. We also have 3 more questions that we have. So how about, well, I'll just in interest of time, how about I just forward them to you and maybe you can take them offline, just making sure that we do not stretch.
I don't want to impose on your calendars. I have another 30 minutes, so I'm not under any gun to click the leave meeting button, and I'll stick around as long as anyone else wants to stick around for conversation. Brian, I don't know where you are. I know you had a more busy calendar, I believe, today.
I have to split, but if anything's directed at me, I can answer him an email. And then to follow up on Peter's last point, I just shared our link to
thank
help
you.
explain the V2 Mom.
Yeah.
Oh, great,
So
Brian, thank you.
yeah. So
if you guys need to go, then we'll do that. But bye, Brian.
Right.
I'll stay until I'm allowed to leave.
I mean, Peter, I appreciate your offer, but I think for the interest of time for
Very
everyone.
good. All right.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
As
And
you,
we will
can
forward.
tell, we've got a half day worth of things we'd love to have the chance to share. So we really appreciate that you were as generous with your time as you were. You know, we were able to get the car out of the garage and up to speed, and that helps. And I hope you got what you wanted from this time.
Awesome. All right. Awesome. Thank you so much, Peter. Thanks so much. Thank you. Bye. Thank you, everyone.